He woke up every morning before the alarm rang. Not because he had to, but because his body was used to it. The small apartment was quiet at that hour. The city outside was still half asleep. He moved softly so he would not wake his child, who was curled up under a thin blanket on the couch bed. The room was small, but it was clean. Toys were stacked in a corner. Shoes were lined near the door. Life was simple, but it worked. He washed his face, tied his warm shoes, and stepped into the kitchen. The kitchen was barely more than a narrow space, but he knew every inch of it. He took out 2 eggs, not one. 2 slices of bread, not one. He poured oats into a pot, more than he needed. This was how it always started. While the food cooked, he checked on his child. He brushed a hand over the small forehead and smiled. Being a single father was not something he had planned, but it was something he took seriously. There were days when money was tight and sleep was short, but he never complained out loud. He believed children heard more than adults thought. When breakfast was ready, he packed 1 plate into a small container and wrapped it carefully. He added a piece of fruit and a napkin. Then he left a note for his child, simple words written in careful letters, reminding them to eat and wait for him. He did this every day. The walk down the hallway was quiet. The building was old, with paint peeling near the stairs. Outside, the morning air was cool. He pulled his jacket closer and started walking toward the next street. It was not far. Just a few minutes away stood a small house that most people passed without noticing. The woman lived there alone. She was older, but not weak. She stood straight when she walked. Her voice was calm. Her eyes were sharp, even when she smiled. He did not know much about her past. He never asked. He only knew that one morning, months ago, he had seen her sitting on the steps with her head down, holding her stomach like it hurt. That first day, he had almost walked past. People were used to minding their own business. But something made him stop. He offered her his extra breakfast. She looked surprised, then nodded and thanked him. Her thank you was firm, clear, and respectful. Not rushed, not dramatic. Just honest. After that, it became a routine. Every morning, he knocked softly on her door. Sometimes she was already waiting. Sometimes she took a moment to answer. She always opened the door herself. She never complained. She never asked for more. She accepted the food with both hands, like it mattered. They talked a little. About the weather. About the city. About his child. She listened closely when he spoke, like his words had weight. When she spoke, she chose her words carefully. She never talked about family. She never talked about her past. The neighbors noticed, but they did not say much. Some thought he was kind. Others thought he was strange. A few assumed the woman was related to him. No one really knew. In that neighborhood, people learned not to ask too many questions. After leaving her house, he walked quickly to the bus stop. He worked long hours doing physical work. His hands were rough. His back often hurt, but he showed up every day. During breaks, he thought about his child. Sometimes he thought about the woman too, wondering if she had eaten enough, or if the food was still warm. In the evenings, after dinner and homework, his child would ask about the old woman, why she lived alone, why she spoke the way she did. He answered honestly. He said some people carried their lives quietly. Some people had stories they were not ready to tell. On weekends, the routine stayed the same. Breakfast was delivered early. The woman would sometimes offer tea. He usually refused, not wanting to take more time. But once in a while, he stayed for a few minutes. The house was neat. No photos on the walls. No decorations. Just order. One morning, his child came with him. The woman knelt down to their level and greeted them politely. She asked about school and listened carefully to every answer. Before they left, She corrected the child's posture gently, like it mattered. He noticed it, but said nothing. There were small things that stood out. The way she folded the napkin before eating. The way she sat straight, even on a simple chair. The way she thanked him every single day, as if it was the first time. He never expected anything in return. He never told anyone about it. To him, it was just something that needed to be done. He remembered times when help came too late, or not at all. He did not want that for someone else. As weeks turned into months, the routine stayed steady. Rain or shine, he showed up. On days when work was harder than usual, he still knocked on her door. On days when money was tight, he still brought breakfast. He did not know that this simple routine was being noticed. Not by neighbors, not by friends, by someone far beyond the quiet street. For now, it was just another morning, another knock, another warm meal shared in silence. He walked away afterward, unaware that his quiet kindness had already started something much bigger than he could imagine. As the days passed, the single dad noticed subtle changes in his morning visits. The woman, once quiet and distant, started to speak more, though never too much about herself. She would comment on the little things he said, or ask questions about his child's school, homework, and even what he liked to eat. Her questions were gentle, curious, and precise. It was the kind of attention that made him pause and think, not because she was crying, but because she truly listened. Some mornings, she would open the door just in time to see him arrive. She would take the breakfast, place it carefully on the table, and invite him to sit for a moment. He would shake his head politely, but sometimes he stayed just a few minutes longer than usual. They would talk quietly about ordinary things. The weather, the news, small observations about the neighborhood. It was never forced. It was never dramatic. It was simple and calm. Over time, he noticed patterns in her behavior. She woke early, always moving with precision. She kept her home neat, every item in order. Her wardrobe was modest, clean, and without any extravagant colors. There was a sense of discipline in her movements, a habit of structure that seemed ingrained in her very being. He could not help but wonder what kind of life she had led before. Sometimes, when she thought he was not looking, she would watch his child closely. There was a softness in her eyes when she looked at the small face, a kind of silent care. She would offer a small tip about posture or remind him to eat slowly. The single dad noticed, but never mentioned it. It felt like trust that could not be spoken. The child, too, began to notice the woman's presence. At first, there was hesitation. Children sense things adults hide. But soon, they began to approach her with questions about her books, the little garden she kept, or the tea she sometimes offered. She answered carefully, never rushing, never dismissing. Slowly, an unspoken bond developed between the three of them. It was quiet, gentle, but growing stronger with each passing day. He started to look forward to these morning interactions more than he expected. They gave him a moment of calm before the long workday. They reminded him that even in a world filled with responsibilities, there were moments of simple humanity that mattered. He often reflected on how rare it was to find someone who listened without judgment, who cared without demanding anything in return. She shared small fragments of her life in passing. A mention of a city far away, a brief story about a friend. Long gone, a reference to a skill she still remembered but seldom used. Each snippet was carefully measured, almost like a puzzle piece, but she never completed the picture. He did not press. He respected the boundaries she set. What mattered was the connection in the present, not the mysteries of the past. Sometimes, he noticed her staring at the walls, at objects, or at nothing at all. He wondered if memories haunted her, if she carried regrets or stories too heavy to share. Yet, when he spoke, she always returned to the moment, her focus clear, her attention precise. He realized that this was someone who had lived a life of discipline and sacrifice, someone whose experiences shaped her in ways that could not be seen easily. Neighbors occasionally noticed the pair, but they never interfered. The relationship between the single dad and the woman was quiet, almost invisible to the casual eye. Only the child seemed to truly understand that this was more than a morning routine. There was care, respect, and a mutual understanding that did not require explanation. One rainy morning, the child asked if they could come along. The single dad hesitated, but agreed. The walk was short, but the child held the container of breakfast with reverence. When they arrived, the woman smiled softly and knelt to meet the child's gaze. She asked simple questions, listened carefully, and offered small guidance. The child left with a sense of respect, admiration, and warmth that lingered for the rest of the day. The single dad began to notice small details about her that were otherwise easy to miss. The precision of her movements, the way she folded the napkin before eating, the careful way she arranged her belongings. It was a life of order and thought, and it fascinated him. He started to realize that her past was filled with experiences that demanded discipline, but she never flaunted it. She carried herself quietly, humbly, and with a dignity that did not require attention. Even when he was tired, even when work had left his back sore and his hands rough, he showed up. Some mornings he almost considered skipping, but then he remembered the first day he had knocked on her door. He remembered the gratitude in her eyes and the calmness she carried. That image was enough to push him forward. During these months, the woman's presence began to affect his child subtly. The child learned patience, attention to detail, and respect through simple observation. They began to mirror small habits, like sitting properly at the table, speaking politely, and listening carefully. The single dad noticed and felt grateful for the influence, even though he knew it came naturally from the woman's example. Not her intention. As the weeks became months, the rhythm of their interactions grew into something steady and dependable. There was comfort in the predictability. The woman began to ask small questions about his day, his plans, or his thoughts. The single dad began to feel that he could share some struggles, though always briefly, always carefully. There was trust building silently, without words, in the shared space of their mornings. It was during one of these quiet moments that he realized how rare such connections were. In a world that often demanded attention, recognition, and status, he found value in small gestures, simple conversations, and consistent care. He realized that kindness, when given without expectation, had a quiet power that could change both the giver and the receiver, even without full knowledge of her past. He felt that his daily visits mattered. It was not about reward, recognition, or gratitude. It was about human connection. It was about understanding that people carried invisible burdens and that small acts of care could make a real difference. He understood that, and he acted on it every day. The bond between them remained unspoken, subtle, and invisible to most. But for the single dad and the woman, it became a quiet lifeline. He could not articulate why he continued, only that he needed to. And she, in turn, accepted it without explanation, without demand, without question. These mornings carried a rhythm that went beyond food. They carried trust, patience, and respect. They carried lessons in humanity that were more powerful than any words could describe. And so, day after day, the single dad continued his routine, unaware that each visit was shaping a story far larger than himself. A story that had roots in kindness, patience, and a deep understanding of the unspoken bonds between people. Over time, the single dad began noticing things he had not paid attention to before. Small details in the woman's home hinted at a life he could not understand fully. There were photographs tucked behind bookshelves, old letters bound with string, and a collection of medals placed carefully in a drawer that was never opened in his presence. Each object seemed ordinary, but there was an unusual precision in the way they were kept, as if every item had a story and a purpose. He noticed the way she sometimes paused when reading the morning newspaper, her eyes narrowing slightly, almost as if she recognized something familiar or remembered a distant memory. There were times when she would pick up a photograph, stare at it quietly for a moment, and then set it down carefully. These actions were subtle, but they caught his attention. He realized she carried experiences that had shaped her deeply, experiences she did not share easily. One morning, as he handed her breakfast, he noticed a faded flag folded neatly in a corner of the room. It was not just any flag. It had a certain significance, one that he could not fully identify. He wondered about the stories it held, about the people it represented, and about the years it had witnessed. But he did not ask. He respected her silence. He had learned that some things were not meant to be asked about, that the weight of someone's past could be heavy, and it was not his place to pry. Occasionally, the woman would speak in ways that hinted at her knowledge and experiences, though she never explained them directly. She corrected his posture with precise words, advised his child on small tasks, or mentioned a distant city she had lived in. Each hint seemed deliberate yet measured. It fascinated him and made him more curious, but he knew better than to press. Her past, he realized, was a private story that was hers alone to reveal. He began noticing the discipline in everything she did. She moved with purpose, her movements efficient and thoughtful. She prepared tea carefully, arranged the dishes in perfect order, and cleaned the small kitchen space meticulously. It was a rhythm of life that spoke of training, of rules, and of dedication. He understood that these habits were not ordinary. They were the marks of someone who had lived a structured life, someone who had responsibilities beyond what most people could imagine. Sometimes he caught her watching the child in silence. There was an intensity in her gaze that was hard to describe. It was not just observation, it was evaluation, attention to detail, and a sense of concern. She would occasionally give small advice, not as a criticism, but as guidance. He watched, realizing that she had a wisdom built from experience, a depth that could only come from a life lived with purpose. The child asked questions about the woman, more often now. Why did she keep things so neatly? Why did she correct their posture? Why did she talk in such precise words? The single dad answered as best as he could, often saying that some people carried habits and skills from their past, and those habits could teach lessons, even if the stories behind them were unknown. As the routine continued, he began to feel a quiet sense of admiration. He admired the woman, not for what she had achieved, but for how she carried herself. There was dignity in her quiet actions, and he realized that it was rare to meet someone who could be so disciplined and kind at the same time. He wondered what life had taught her to make her this way, and he respected the fact that she chose to remain modest about it. There were moments when he sensed sorrow in her silence. He could not explain it, but sometimes her eyes seemed far away, as if recalling memories she did not want to share. He felt a mixture of empathy and caution. He knew that certain stories could carry pain, and he had learned to respect boundaries. He continued his visits, offering breakfast and conversation, without forcing her to reveal anything. One day, while walking back from her house, he found himself thinking about her childhood, her younger years, and what kind of life had shaped her. He imagined a life filled with challenges, responsibilities, and possibly loss. Yet she carried it all with composure and calmness. He realized that kindness did not erase hardships, but it could make life bearable for those who faced them alone. He began to notice the way the woman reacted to certain news on television. When military events or stories about service appeared, her eyes would change slightly, her posture would become straighter, and a thoughtful silence would follow. These small reactions told him that her past was linked to experiences of duty, responsibility, and perhaps sacrifice. He sensed a story that was larger than himself, a story of courage hidden behind quiet routines. As he continued visiting, he noticed the medals and awards tucked away in drawers. He did not ask about them, but he could see the pride in how they were arranged, each in a specific place. There was respect for what they represented, and he understood that these were not symbols meant to show off, but to honor a life of service and dedication. His admiration grew, but so did his curiosity. He did not ask questions directly. Instead, he watched and listened, learning through small gestures and careful words. He realized that understanding someone did not always require asking for their history. Sometimes observation and respect were enough to feel the depth of their experiences. In many ways, the woman became a teacher for both him and his child. Not in a formal way, but through habits, choices, and attention to detail. They learned patience, care, and quiet strength. They learned that lives could carry heavy burdens, and yet people could still choose kindness and discipline every day. It was a lesson that was far more powerful than any story or conversation. The single dad began to recognize that these small daily interactions were shaping a larger understanding of life. The woman's quiet dignity, her attention to detail, and the care she showed in small gestures were leaving impressions on him and his child. They were learning that courage and kindness were often unseen, that true strength was in the quiet moments rather than in grand declarations. Every morning continued to hold new lessons. Even when she said very little, every action spoke volumes. The folded napkins, the precise placement of dishes, the careful attention to posture, all of it carried lessons about discipline, respect, and the value of thoughtful living. He realized that her past, though hidden, was influencing their present in ways he could not have imagined. He began to feel that he was part of something bigger than himself, even if he did not yet know what it was. The woman's presence, the quiet bond they shared, and the respect she showed for life's routines were teaching him about patience, resilience, and humility. It was a reminder that people often carry stories that are invisible to the world, and that every small act of kindness can touch those stories in meaningful ways. By now, he was no longer just bringing breakfast. He was a part of her daily life in a quiet, meaningful way. She acknowledged his presence without fanfare, but there was a subtle recognition of the connection between them. He began to understand that kindness, attention, and respect were more powerful than words, and that some bonds needed no explanation to exist. And in these unspoken moments, he realized that life's lessons often came not from grand events, but from ordinary mornings and quiet exchanges that carried unseen weight. It was an ordinary morning, or so he thought. The city had not yet fully woken, and the air was crisp with the hint of winter. He had packed breakfast as usual, checked on his child, and walked down the narrow street toward the small house where the woman lived. Everything seemed normal. The routine felt comforting, predictable, and safe. He knocked on her door softly, as he always did. A moment passed before it opened, and she appeared in her usual calm and measured manner. She took the breakfast container, thanked him quietly, and invited him to stay for a few minutes as the rain started to drizzle outside. He shook his head politely, placing the container on the small kitchen table. He glanced at her, noticing the same careful movements, the same precise gestures, the same quiet presence that had become a part of his morning's. As he was about to leave, a sharp knock interrupted the calm. It was different from his usual knock, firm, urgent, and demanding attention. He paused, unsure. The woman froze slightly, her eyes narrowing as if recognizing something familiar. She said nothing, but gestured for him to wait. He stepped back, feeling a sudden tension that was new and unexpected. Moments later, the door swung open, and two men in military uniforms stood at the threshold. Their posture was rigid, their expression serious. They carried a quiet authority that filled the small space immediately. The single dad felt his heart race. Questions flooded his mind. Had he done something wrong? Was there trouble he could not see? His hands trembled slightly, not from fear of them, but from the sudden intrusion into the normal, safe rhythm of his mornings. The officers introduced themselves briefly, explaining that they were looking for him, but not because of any wrongdoing on his part. The woman, still silent, watched closely as they spoke. There was a calm in her eyes, but an intensity that made him feel the weight of the moment. He realized immediately that whatever was happening, it had to do with her, not him. Yet they needed him for something he could not yet understand. One officer stepped forward and spoke directly to him. They explained that the woman he had been bringing breakfast to was not an ordinary person. She had served in critical roles in the military, positions that required skill, dedication, and sacrifices that few could comprehend. The medals he had glimpsed, the precise habits, and the disciplined mannerisms were not just quirks of habit. They were signs of a life committed to service, of experiences that shaped her every action. He listened in disbelief, struggling to process the information. For months, he had seen her as simply a neighbor, a woman deserving of kindness and respect. He had never imagined that the quiet dignity, the precise movements, and the careful attention to detail were the marks of someone who had been part of missions, operations, and responsibilities at the highest levels of service, that the officers explained that they had come to ensure her safety and to involve her in matters that required her expertise once again. They emphasized that he had no obligation to continue anything, that his role had been one of kindness and humanity, not duty or service. Yet, as they spoke, he realized the subtle truth. His simple, daily acts had touched someone extraordinary, and his presence had been noticed in ways he could never have imagined. The woman finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but carried authority, even in the quietest tones. She thanked him, not just for the breakfast, but for the consistency, the care, and the humanity he had shown. She admitted that his daily visits had brought a warmth and reassurance that she had not felt in years, a sense of normalcy that had been absent from her life after decades of service. Her words were measured, precise, and sincere. There was no exaggeration, no drama, just gratitude for the simple kindness he had offered. The single dad felt a mix of awe and humility. He had acted without expectation, without thought of recognition, yet the impact of his actions was far greater than he could have imagined. The child, who had accompanied him that morning, sensed the seriousness of the moment and clung slightly to his side. He smiled gently, reassuringly, and the woman acknowledged the child's presence with a nod, a small gesture of inclusion and respect. As the officers continued to speak, he began to understand the depth of her experiences. They mentioned missions, strategic responsibilities, and the sacrifices she had made in her personal life. The medals were not mere decorations. They were symbols of courage, resilience, and dedication. The stories behind them were hidden, not because they were secretive, but because they carried weight and consequence far beyond ordinary understanding. He realized that his daily visits, which he had thought of as small, mundane gestures, had become a bridge between her private, disciplined world and the ordinary rhythms of everyday life. He had given her a moment of care, humanity, and connection that even someone with her experience needed. His kindness had touched her in a way that formal recognition, medals, or honors could not. The officers assured him that he had done nothing wrong and that his role had been invaluable, even if he had not realized it. They respected his discretion and the quiet nature of his support. They emphasized that it was rare to find someone who could offer kindness without expectation, and that his presence had mattered more than he could understand. The woman prepared herself to leave with them. She moved with the same precise care he had observed for months. She took a moment to look at him and the child, acknowledging the bond that had formed, however quiet and unspoken. She expressed gratitude once more, a simple but profound acknowledgment of the daily care he had shown. There were no grand gestures, no dramatics, just sincere recognition and respect. As she stepped out the door with the officers, he felt a mix of pride, humility, and curiosity. The ordinary mornings had changed, yet they had also revealed the extraordinary power of human connection. His small actions, performed without expectation or reward, had reached someone remarkable and had made a meaningful difference in her life. The child looked up at him, eyes wide with wonder and curiosity. He knelt down to explain, in simple terms, that sometimes people who seem ordinary in our daily lives carry stories and experiences that are beyond our imagination. That simple kindness can reach far deeper than we think, and that small, consistent acts can have a lasting impact on someone's life. Walking back down the street after the event, the single dad reflected on the morning. He realized that life often surprises in ways we cannot foresee, that the quiet routines, small gestures, and consistent care we offer to others can resonate in unexpected ways. That human connection, even in its simplest form, carries a power that cannot be measured by awards, recognition, or status. He understood, more clearly than ever, that kindness was not about expectation or recognition. It was about presence, attention, and care. It was about showing up day after day and offering warmth, understanding, and humanity, even when it seemed small or ordinary. That morning changed the rhythm of his routine, but it did not change his heart. He continued to value small acts of care, quiet gestures of humanity, and the connections that form in silence. The woman's departure, accompanied by the officers, was a reminder that some bonds, however quiet, can have profound significance, shaping lives in ways that remain invisible to the outside world. He returned home, reflecting on the lessons of the morning. His child asked questions, and he answered honestly, explaining that some people live extraordinary lives quietly, and that even simple acts of kindness can touch them deeply. He realized that the world often hides stories of courage, resilience, and sacrifice behind ordinary faces, and that noticing and honoring these stories was itself an act of humanity. A single dad understood that life's true impact was not always visible. It was measured in the subtle shifts, the quiet acknowledgments, and the bonds formed in small, consistent gestures. His mornings, once routine and ordinary, now held a deeper meaning, a reminder that even unseen kindness carries profound value, shaping the lives of others in ways that ripple far beyond what we imagine. After that morning, life changed in ways the single dad could not have expected. The woman, who had carried her life quietly and with discipline, was gone for official matters, but the impact of his small daily kindness lingered. The child asked questions, curious about why she had left and what she would do. He explained gently, without revealing more than necessary, that sometimes people who have done extraordinary things are called upon to use their skills, and that their lives can be very different from what we see each day. For the single dad, the experience opened a new understanding of humanity. He realized that his acts of care, which he had thought were small and ordinary, could have deep significance for someone who had lived a life of sacrifice and duty. It was not about recognition or reward. It was about showing up day after day, offering warmth, attention, and respect. These simple acts had bridged the gap between ordinary life and the extraordinary experiences of another human being. He continued his routines, but with a renewed sense of purpose. Every morning, he prepared breakfast, not just for his child, but with the memory of the woman in mind. He thought about the discipline, the precision, and the quiet dignity she had shown, and he tried to bring a little of that into his own life. It was not always easy. Work was still hard, the days were still long, and the responsibilities of single parenthood remained challenging. But the experience reminded him that small actions, done with care, mattered more than grand gestures. The child, too, learned valuable lessons from the entire experience. They saw firsthand that true honor was not about medals, titles, or recognition, but about integrity, care, and consistency. They began to understand that kindness, even when unnoticed or unacknowledged, had the power to touch lives profoundly. The lessons were subtle, woven into everyday routines, quiet conversations, and the shared moments of preparation and departure in the mornings. Neighbors noticed a change as well. There was a calm in the household, a quiet strength that came from the father's sense of purpose. He was still the same man they had seen, walking down the street with a container of breakfast, but now there was an added depth to his presence. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. The lessons of compassion, humility, and respect for the unspoken stories of others radiated through his actions, influencing those around him without effort or proclamation. Months passed, and the woman occasionally returned for brief visits. Each time, there was no drama, no exaggerated gestures, just a simple acknowledgement of the bond they shared. She would offer a nod, a quiet word of thanks, or a careful correction of posture for the child, just as she had before. These moments were brief, yet they carried profound meaning. The single dad realized that relationships and bonds did not always need constant presence to be significant. Their impact could be lasting, subtle, and quietly transformative. Through these experiences, he also learned the importance of observation. He understood that people often carry invisible burdens and that their stories might not be visible at first glance. The woman's quiet strength, her careful habits, and her measured words had taught him to look beyond appearances, to respect what could not be immediately understood, and to value the small, consistent acts of care that define character. The single dad began sharing these lessons with his child in small ways. He spoke about patience, humility, and empathy. He explained that courage was not always visible, that strength could be quiet, and that kindness had a power all its own. They practiced simple acts of care together, preparing meals thoughtfully, speaking politely, listening attentively, and the child absorbed these lessons naturally, understanding them not as lectures, but as lived experiences. He also reflected on his own life. The routine of bringing breakfast, which had once seemed ordinary, had transformed into something meaningful. It had allowed him to contribute positively to someone else's life, to make a difference without fanfare or expectation. He realized that the act itself, and the intention behind it, was what gave life meaning, not recognition or reward. The woman's presence, even when absent, continued to inspire him. He thought often about her discipline, her attention to detail, and her dignity. He carried these observations into his work and daily routines, striving to maintain consistency, thoughtfulness, and care in all he did. These qualities became part of the rhythm of his household, shaping both his life and his child's in subtle, enduring ways. One afternoon, as he returned from work, he found a small note left on the kitchen table. It was from the woman, written in careful handwriting. She expressed her gratitude once more, acknowledging the comfort and normalcy he had provided. The note was simple, yet it carried profound meaning. He realized that sometimes words were not necessary. The acts themselves, consistent and caring, had already communicated the depth of his impact. The experience taught him another lesson, that human connection often transcends words. The daily visits, the shared moments, and the quiet care had created a bond that was invisible to the outside world, yet deeply felt by those involved. It reminded him that the significance of our actions often goes beyond what we can see or understand in the moment. The single dad continued to live his life with the lessons of the experience firmly in mind. He remained committed to his child, his work, and the small routines that gave structure and meaning to their days. Yet he also carried an understanding that kindness, respect, and attention to the lives of others were forms of honor in themselves. They were ways of acknowledging the humanity, dignity, and stories of people we encounter, even in brief, everyday interactions. Over time, he began to notice subtle changes in himself. Patience came more naturally. Small annoyances and frustrations carried less weight. He approached each day with a quiet resilience, shaped by the awareness that life was not always visible in its challenges or its triumphs. He understood that every person had a story, and that simple acts of kindness could have a ripple effect far beyond what was immediately apparent. The child grew alongside him, absorbing these lessons in practical, lived ways. They learned to recognize the value of consistency, the importance of care, and the quiet strength that comes from acting with integrity. They observed that relationships, even subtle or brief ones, could leave lasting impressions and shape character in ways that formal teaching could not. The father watched with quiet pride, realizing that the impact of his small morning routines had extended beyond the woman, shaping his child's understanding of life, compassion, and human connection. And so, life moved forward. The city continued to wake each day, work continued, and responsibilities remained. Yet the mornings retained a quiet significance. Each step down the narrow street, each container of breakfast, each small gesture of attention and care became a part of a larger story, one of human connection, quiet heroism, and the invisible power of kindness. The single dad understood, more than ever, that honor was not about rank, recognition, or public applause. It was about the choices we make quietly, consistently, and with integrity. It was about seeing others, acknowledging their humanity, and offering care without expectation. It was about the unspoken bonds that formed through small actions and the lasting impact of kindness offered in its simplest form. In the end, the story of the morning visits, the quiet woman, and the unexpected officers was not just a tale of extraordinary circumstances. It was a story about the everyday heroism of ordinary people, the significance of human connection, and the lessons learned when we choose to act with compassion and integrity. The single dad and his child carried these lessons forward, shaping their lives and the lives of those around them. A living testament to the idea that simple acts of kindness can honor lives in ways that no medal or recognition ever could.